These are the 13 films that hurt Hollywood's pockets badly in 1952, a year when the movie industry lost more money than at any point in its history up to that point. Television sets invaded American living rooms while the government dismantled the studio system, and legendary directors alongside beloved stars delivered one expensive failure after another. RKO Pictures hemorrhaged over $10 million across 31 films that year. MGM watched Spencer Tracy's first money-losing picture in 17 years sink their entire fiscal year. Charlie Chaplin's masterpiece wasn't destroyed by critics, but by political persecution that banned it from American screens for 2 decades. We begin with the single most documented financial disaster of 1952, and it came from the most powerful studio in Hollywood. $1,856,000 vanished on MGM's Plymouth Adventure, making it the studio's most embarrassing failure of the year. Around the MGM lot, executives quickly dubbed it MGM's Thanksgiving Turkey, a grim pun on its November release timing and catastrophic returns. Ernest Gebler's 1950 bestseller about the Mayflower voyage had sold 5 million copies, and studio head Dor Sherry championed the adaptation despite executive opposition. He would later admit he was wrong to fight his bosses on this one. Director Mervyn LeRoy reportedly refused to helm the film because he was, in his words, horrified by the awful script. $3,185,000 went into production, and the box office brought back just $3,025,000. Spencer Tracy starred as Captain Christopher Jones, but at 52 years old, critics thought he looked 70 and deemed him far too old for romantic scenes with the much younger Gene Tierney. The Harvard Crimson published a brutal review on November 28, 1952, calling it dull, idealized history, stolidly performed, valuable only to slow fifth graders who need their American history acted out for them. Here's the thing about the real Captain Jones. He was a happily married family man with 8 children. Mayflower descendants slammed MGM for slandering both him and Dorothy Bradford by inventing a romance between them. Sherry later acknowledged the fundamental problem, saying there weren't enough descendants of the original Mayflower passengers to help it cross over to success. Director Clarence Brown grew so exhausted by his work on the production that he retired from filmmaking entirely afterward, making this his final picture. Sherry had to threaten Spencer Tracy with a lawsuit just to get him to appear in his next film. And here's where it gets strange. Despite all this failure, the film actually won the Academy Award for Best Special Effects. Fred Astaire had been avoiding this project for years, and his instincts proved correct. $1,570,000 in losses made the Belle of New York one of MGM's costliest mistakes of the decade. MGM acquired the rights in 1943 and first assigned Astaire in 1946, but rather than make the film, he retired from show business entirely. His return for Easter Parade in 1948 meant the studio could finally insist he honor his commitment. $2,606,000 went into the budget, yet the picture earned only $1,993,000. Astaire later recounted the exact moment he knew the film was doomed. During a screening of the finale where he and co-star Vera Ellen dance on air above the city, a woman in the audience blurted out within earshot, "Well, how silly can you get?" That told him exactly where they stood with this one. His autobiography, Steps in Time, contains an honest assessment where he wrote that the element of fantasy which prevailed backfired completely. The trick of dancing on air, which they hoped would prove effective, failed to register above all else. 8 months on Bell beating his brains out, and all he got was a fortune. As he put it, there is one thing about having a flop movie at a major studio that has it all over a stage flop: you do get paid. Variety gave a lukewarm review, calling it pleasantly done, but not of a quality that rates more than passing interest. Critics found the floating sequences too silly to watch without embarrassment. Today, the film ranks as one of Astaire's second worst pictures, better only than the dreadful Yolanda and the Thief. Astaire himself believed it would play very well today, suggesting it was simply ahead of its time. Charlie Chaplin's final American film became one of Hollywood history's most politically significant failures. A domestic commercial disaster caused not by quality, but by organized boycotts during the Red Scare. $900,000 went into production, and critics internationally acclaimed the work. But American theaters brought in only around $1 million in extremely limited release because most venues refused to show it. The political destruction happened while Chaplin was literally at sea. He departed the United States aboard the RMS Queen Elizabeth with his family on September 17th through 18th, 1952. The very next day, September 19th, while Chaplin floated somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, U.S. Attorney General James P. McGranary revoked his re-entry permit and called Chaplin an unsavory character and a menace to womanhood. 3 major theater chains immediately withdrew the film after that announcement. Fox West Coast, Loews, and RKO all canceled their bookings. American Legion members actively picketed any screenings that did occur and pressured theater owners to cancel. Charles Skouras, president of National Theaters and Fox West Coast, blocked release in Los Angeles entirely, stating they did not want to be a guinea pig in testing public reaction. 20 years passed before Los Angeles audiences could see the film, with the ban lifting in 1972. FBI files released in the 1980s revealed the government had no substantial evidence to actually bar Chaplin's re-entry. Despite its American failure, the film earned approximately $8 million total overseas and set box office records in Japan. This film also marked the only time the 2 greatest silent comedy icons ever appeared together on screen. Chaplin learned that Buster Keaton was going through hard times and insisted on casting him. According to biographer Rudy Blesch, Chaplin eased his notoriously rigid directorial style to give Keaton free rein to invent his own comic business. Critical reappraisal came decades later, and Limelight now holds between 88 and 96% on Rotten Tomatoes. Best Original Dramatic Score went to the film at the 1973 Academy Awards, eligible only after its first Los Angeles screening on December 13, 1972. Chaplin returned that same year to accept an honorary award and received a 12-minute standing ovation, the longest in Oscar history. Another Dore-Schary personal production hemorrhaged money for MGM. $1,060,000 disappeared on Washington's Story, which earned a dismal $684,000 total, with $557,000 from the US and Canada and just $127,000 from foreign markets. This pro-Congress picture tried to cast politicians in a positive light during the Hollywood witch hunt era, starring Van Johnson and Patricia Neal under the direction of Robert Pyrosh. Sherry's preference for message pictures over the splashy, wholesome entertainment favored by his predecessor Louis B. Mayer proved commercially disastrous time and again. Plymouth Adventure, Washington's Story, and the later Dreamwife in 1953 accelerated MGM's declining fortunes through Sherry's personal productions and contributed to his eventual firing in November 1956. Walt Disney's ambitious animated adaptation earned the description of the biggest financial and critical disappointment RKO had during the year. According to the RKO story, official losses reached $1 million. July 1951 brought the theatrical release, though RKO's distribution losses carried into 1952 fiscal reporting. $3 million went into the budget, but initial domestic rentals came to only $2,400,000. Roy Disney had first explored the rights back in 1932, meaning the project spent over 13 years in development. Walt Disney himself blamed the result, stating the film lacked heart and that Alice's character was not sympathetic enough. Animator Ward Kimball offered his own assessment to Leonard Maltin for the Disney films, saying the picture suffered from too many cooks, meaning too many directors. 5 directors were each trying to top the other guy and make his sequence the biggest and craziest in the show, and this had a self-canceling effect on the final product. British critics accused the film of Americanizing a great work of English literature, while the Chicago Tribune called the figures utterly lacking in enchantment. Disney never re-released the film theatrically during his lifetime. A cult following emerged in the 1960s and 1970s counterculture due to psychedelic associations. The 1974 re-release carried marketing references to Jefferson Airplane's White Rabbit and grossed an additional $3,500,000. Today, it stands as a beloved Disney classic. $700,000 in losses turned this RKO production into a textbook example of how troubled production destroys profitability. Filming began in September 1950 with Josef von Sternberg directing Robert Mitchum and Jane Russell. Nicholas Ray replaced von Sternberg for extensive reshoots, and the production took nearly 18 months from filming to release. According to John Baxter, fights on the set were common because von Sternberg had a habit of treating actors as mere details of decor, which drew strong objections from both Jane Russell and Gloria Graham. Von Sternberg gave his scathing assessment in his 1965 autobiography Fun in a Chinese Laundry. writing that the film was made under the supervision of 6 different men in charge. Instead of fingers in that pie, half a dozen clowns immersed various parts of their anatomy in it. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times lambasted the characters as flimflam and the story as pedestrian. Andrew Saris of the Museum of Modern Art deplored Macao as evidence of how superficial mere style can be. $600,000 in losses accompanied this RKO picture, which became a landmark in Hollywood blacklist history. HUAC had subpoenaed screenwriter Paul Jericho in April 1951, and he invoked the Fifth Amendment. Howard Hughes ordered Jericho's credit removed before release, citing a morals clause violation. Jericho sued RKO for $350,000 in March 1952, but the court ruled against him and established the precedent that producers could employ blacklisted writers without crediting them. Jericho got booted out of Hollywood and later made the independent film Salt of the Earth with fellow blacklistees. Bosley Crowther called it one of those jukebox gambling films that gives the impression of being made up as it goes along, noting that the repetitive emphasis on Jane Russell's physique was startling at first, then funny, and finally just plain monotonous and dull. Studio interference sabotaged Howard Hawks' frontier epic, resulting in an estimated loss of over $350,000. Close to $2 million went into the budget, but U.S. rentals reached only $1,650,000. This was the first Hollywood production to complete a large-scale outdoor drama entirely on location without process photography, shot in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and along the Bighorn River in Montana. RKO shortened the film from 140 minutes to 120 minutes in the interest of facilitating more screenings. Hawks gave a blunt assessment, saying the studio cutting ended up terminating the film at the box office. Variety noted that impact was dissipated by the marathon running time, while critic A. H. Weiler simply declared that The Big Sky was much too long. Despite the commercial failure, 2 Academy Award nominations came its way for Best Supporting Actor for Arthur Honeycutt and Best Cinematography in Black and White for Russell Harlan. One of Hollywood's most costly casting decisions destroyed this George Bernard Shaw adaptation. $1,250,000 went into the budget, yet the film failed to appear among the top-grossing titles of 1952. The disaster began with a casting change that defies belief. Harpo Marx originally signed to play Androcles in what would have been his first and only speaking role on film. Filming began August 13, 1951, with Harpo in the lead, and he worked for 5 weeks while producer Gabriel Pascal called him the perfect Androcles. Howard Hughes saw Alan Young on television and impetuously insisted on recasting the lead. All of Harpo's footage got scrapped and is presumed lost forever. The delay also cost the production Rex Harrison as Caesar and Dana Andrews as the Roman captain, and their footage got scrapped as well. Nobody laughed when the film opened in American cinemas. Hughes withdrew the picture and shot 2 weeks of new sequences. Alan Young recalled in 1987 that Hughes put in girls with gauze and a real lion, and it became what Young called a blood and guts film. 10,000 square feet of Coliseum set stood 45 feet high and cost over $60,000. All of it ultimately wasted on a picture that vanished without a trace at the box office. Fritz Lang's expressionist Western was considered something of a disaster upon its 1952 release. $900,000 went into the budget, but the unusual stylized approach confused audiences expecting a traditional Western from Marlene Dietrich. Distribution troubles plagued the film from the start. 20th Century Fox originally intended to distribute but refused to release or pay for the film. RKO eventually paid between $700,000 and $780,000 in advance for distribution rights. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times called it run-of-the-mill. Dietrich's star power was waning by 1952, and the film's artistic ambitions worked against its commercial prospects. Decades later, the picture became a revered cult classic, with its expressionist style now praised by the same critical establishment that once dismissed it. Nicholas Ray's rodeo drama earned around $4,100,000 domestically, but still carried the label of critical and box office failure at the time. Robert Mitchum, Susan Hayward, and Arthur Kennedy starred in the production, and Mitchum would later consider it one of 3 favorites among his entire body of work. The unconventional drama appealed strongly to rural Midwest and Western markets, but struggled badly in urban areas. RKO's most turbulent year meant the film simply could not find its audience. Today, the film holds 100% on Rotten Tomatoes based on retrospective reviews. Dave Kerr of the Chicago Reader called it a masterpiece by Nicholas Ray, and perhaps the most melancholy and reflective of his films. This was Howard Hughes's final film as producer, and it arrived as part of RKO's catastrophic $10 million loss year. Robert Mitchum starred in this Korean War picture directed by Tay Garnett. Pentagon officials refused to officially endorse the film despite providing military cooperation. A controversial scene showed U.S. forces shelling refugees, and the Army requested its deletion, but Hughes refused to make the cut. Robert Mitchum got into a fistfight with an Army private during filming, threatening to derail the entire production. Critics described the result as standard fare and propaganda. Competing messaging about whether war was necessary or destructive confused audiences and satisfied no one. Fritz Lang's second 1952 release starred Barbara Stanwyck, Robert Ryan, Paul Douglas, and a rising young actress named Marilyn Monroe in a supporting role. Specific loss figures remain undocumented for this film, but it formed part of RKO's catastrophic 1952 slate. Despite featuring major talent, the picture underperformed in a year when only one in-house RKO production was shot in the last 5 months. The studio was collapsing in real time around every film it released. The box office disasters of 1952 reveal an industry in profound transition. Weekly movie attendance had plummeted from 82 to 90 million in 1946 to just 51 million by 1952, a staggering 43% decline. Television sets now occupied 32% of American households, up from less than 1% in 1948. RKO's collapse under Howard Hughes's erratic management presaged the studio's complete demise by 1957. MGM's prestigious failures demonstrated that even the most powerful studio could not guarantee returns on expensive productions. Limelight's political destruction showed how McCarthyism could devastate commercially viable films through organized persecution. Common threads connecting these failures remain relevant today. Studio interference destroyed directors' visions in The Big Sky. Casting decisions overruled creative judgment in Androcles and The Lion. Historical inaccuracies alienated audiences in Plymouth Adventure. Fantasy elements misfired spectacularly in The Belle of New York. Yet several of these films achieved critical rehabilitation and cult status decades later. The Lusty Men, Rancho Notorious, and Limelight all proved that 1952's commercial failures were not necessarily artistic ones. This year marked the beginning of the end for the classic studio system. Within 5 years, RKO would cease production entirely. The lessons of 1952 about the dangers of executive meddling, the unpredictability of audience taste, and the devastating impact of political interference remain instructive for understanding both Hollywood history and the film industry today.